community music center was always busy in the late afternoon. People walked in and out with instrument cases, warm drinks, and soft conversations. The air inside carried a mix of old wood, fresh sheet music, and the sound of someone practicing in one of the smaller rooms. It was the kind of place where every person felt welcome, no matter their skill level or background. But on this particular day, the atmosphere felt just a little tighter, a little heavier, because one person had already decided the day would revolve around him. He arrived with the kind of confidence that made people step to the side before he held his violin case like it was a crown. And the staff at the front desk exchanged quiet glances as he walked past them without even checking in. He often came to the center for practice, and although he was talented, his attitude made it hard for anyone to enjoy being around him. He spoke loudly about his achievements, corrected people even when they hadn't asked for advice, and acted as though the building belonged to him. He entered the main hall, where the grand piano sat at the center. A few people were sitting on the benches along the wall, waiting for their turn to use the instruments or simply relaxing after a long day. He placed his violin case on top of a table and looked around with a smirk, as if checking to see who would admire him today. Most people kept their eyes down, pretending not to notice. A few minutes later, the door opened again. A woman stepped inside, carrying a worn music folder pressed gently to her chest. She looked calm but slightly nervous, the way someone might feel when entering a familiar place after a long break. Her clothes were simple, and her hair was tied loosely behind her. She nodded politely to the people sitting near the entrance, and walked toward the desk. She spoke softly, but her voice carried enough warmth to make the staff member smile. She explained that she needed the piano for a short while, just to practice a piece she was preparing for a small charity event. The staff checked the schedule and told her it was free for at least an hour. She thanked them with genuine kindness, the kind that stayed in the air long after a person walked away. But before she could move toward the piano, the musician turned around. He had been listening just enough to hear that she wanted the piano, and his smirk widened. "You're here to practice?" he said loudly, just soft enough to sound polite, but loud enough for everyone to hear. She nodded, offering a small smile. "Yes, just for a little while." He chuckled in a way that wasn't friendly at all. "Do you know how to use that piano?" "It's not exactly a beginner's instrument." Someone in the room shifted uncomfortably. Another person sighed quietly. People had witnessed this behavior from him before. He always found a way to put someone else down to make himself feel more impressive. The woman didn't respond right away. She simply kept her gentle expression and waited for him to finish whatever point he thought he was making. He leaned against the piano, tapping the polished wood with a finger. "You should know that the people who use this one usually have a certain level of skill. It's not for simple practice." She didn't seem bothered. "I understand. I'll only be a few minutes." Her tone wasn't defensive or irritated. It was calm. That calmness more than anything seemed to bother him. "A few minutes?" he repeated with an exaggerated laugh. "I'm not sure a few minutes is enough for someone who's still learning." The staff member at the desk opened their mouth to step in, but the woman shook her head gently, signaling that everything was fine. She took a small step forward, but he still blocked the piano with his presence. He crossed his arms and tilted his head, studying her like she was a misplaced student in a room meant for professionals. "What piece are you even trying to play?" he asked, his tone light but sharp. She hesitated before answering. Not because she didn't know, but because she sensed the question was more of a trap than genuine curiosity. "Just something classical," she finally said. He raised an eyebrow. "Just something classical? That's vague. Maybe you should start with simpler pieces before attempting anything big."
Nice.
The people watching shifted again. One woman in the corner pressed her lips together, clearly annoyed. A man near the door shook his head but stayed silent. No one wanted to escalate the situation. Still, the woman's posture stayed relaxed. "I'll only take the piano for a short time," she repeated softly. For a moment, he stared at her as if trying to understand why she wasn't reacting the way most people did when he talked down to them. Usually people either argued or awkwardly backed away, but she did neither. She simply waited. He let out a dramatic sigh. "Fine. If you want to make a fool of yourself, go ahead. I suppose it could be entertaining." Couple of people shot him sharp looks, but he didn't notice or didn't care. She walked toward the piano calmly, placing her music folder on the side. Her fingers brushed the keys lightly, not playing anything yet, just feeling the smooth surface, as though reconnecting with an old friend. Before she could sit, he leaned in again. "You know," he said, lowering his voice but keeping the arrogance, "I've played at events around the city. People respect my work. Maybe you should listen to me rather than embarrass yourself." She turned her head slightly and looked at him. Not with anger, not with fear, just a calm, steady gaze that made him freeze for a moment. "I appreciate your advice," she said softly, "but I think I'll try anyway." There was something in her tone that held more confidence than anything he had shown all afternoon. It wasn't showy or loud. It was quiet, steady, and real. And somehow, that made him even more irritated. He stepped back finally, though he stayed close, clearly waiting to judge her the moment she touched the keys. She adjusted the bench. She sat with a posture that wasn't stiff, but wasn't careless either. Her hands rested on her lap for a moment as she took a slow breath. The room, without anyone telling it to, grew quieter. People watched with subtle curiosity, wondering what she would do next. The musician crossed his arms again and looked at her with raised brows, as if expecting her to freeze or stumble. But she didn't. She placed her hands on the keys with a kind of gentle certainty, like someone who had spent years understanding how each note felt beneath her fingertips. Still, she did not play yet. She took another breath, deeper this time, grounding herself. There was something peaceful about the way she prepared. Something that made even the most impatient observers lean forward. He scoffed under his breath. Any day now. But she didn't respond. It wasn't that she ignored him, it was that his words held no weight in the space she had created within herself. The next moment, she gently pressed a single key, letting the sound echo softly in the room. It wasn't part of the piece. It was a test, the way a person might touch the surface of water before diving in. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound settle. When she opened them again, her expression had changed. It wasn't just calm anymore. It carried purpose. Those watching could sense it. They didn't know exactly what she was about to play, but something in her presence told them it would be worth hearing. Meanwhile, the musician's arrogance still sat on his face, but it had started to shift, even if he didn't realize it yet. Behind his confident posture was the slightest flicker of uncertainty, something no one else had ever managed to place there before, and though no one knew it yet, not the people watching, not even she herself, the moment she began playing would change everything in the room. But for now, the room waited, quiet, still, expecting. The woman sat in front of the piano with her hands resting lightly on the keys. But she still hadn't begun playing. The room felt different now, more focused, as if every small sound mattered. A chair creaked softly. Someone cleared their throat. A distant instrument in another room hummed through the wall. Yet even with those small sounds, it felt strangely quiet. She didn't seem rushed. She didn't seem bothered by the man standing beside her with his arms crossed and his eyes full of expectation. Instead, she looked like someone who knew exactly why she was here and what she needed to do. Her calmness filled the room in a way no one expected. The man shifted his weight, tapping his shoe against the floor. He looked around to see if anyone noticed him, hoping to keep attention on himself. But the people watching weren't interested in him anymore. Their eyes were on her hands, waiting for the first note. Finally, she placed both hands on the keys, and the man leaned forward slightly, as if preparing to catch her mistake the moment it happened. "This should be good," he muttered under his breath. But she didn't react. She kept her posture straight, her breathing steady. She wasn't here to compete with him, and she wasn't here to prove him wrong. She simply wanted to practice, just as she said from the start. Still, something inside her shifted when she remembered his words, the ones meant to belittle her, the ones he probably didn't even think twice about. Not because they were important, but because he had grown used to speaking that way. She had dealt with people like him before. People who believed kindness was weakness. People who saw quietness as lack of skill. She didn't hold anger for him. She only felt a quiet determination rise inside her. the kind that came when someone underestimated her one time too many. She pressed down on the first notes. The sound was soft but even, a simple beginning, a gentle opening. Her fingers glided from one key to the next as if continuing a conversation she had paused earlier in the day. The melody grew, and the room grew even quieter. The man straightened up. The smirk on his face faltered a little, though he tried to hide it by clearing his throat. She kept playing. The next part of the melody had more movement, more emotion. Her fingers moved with careful control, not rushing anything. People watching leaned forward subconsciously, drawn in by the way the music filled the room. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic, but it felt real. The man forced a laugh. All right, not bad. For a warm-up, nobody responded to him. No one even looked his way. Their eyes were still on her. His laugh died quickly. She continued building the melody, letting the notes rise and fall naturally. Every sound she created felt alive, like her hands were telling a story she had carried for years. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing because the music lived in her, and she simply allowed it to come out. A woman sitting near the door blinked in surprise and whispered to the person next to her. I didn't expect that. Another person nodded slowly. Neither did I. The man heard their whispers. His jaw tightened. He tried to speak again, maybe to reclaim attention, maybe to minimize her talent before it grew too obvious. But the words didn't come out. The music filled all the space between people. Leaving no room for interruptions, the melody shifted again, moving into a part that required more skill. Her fingers danced across the keys in patterns that weren't simple at all. Her posture never changed, and her expression stayed soft, almost peaceful. The man's eyes widened as he recognized the structure of the piece. He knew enough about classical music to understand that the section she was playing wasn't something a beginner could pull off. He tried to hide his reaction, but a few people noticed anyway. One man in the back raised his eyebrows, impressed. Another person's mouth dropped open slightly. Someone else whispered, "She's really good." The man's face turned a shade darker. She continued, unaware or uncaring of the growing attention. Her touch on the keys shifted from soft to firm as the piece demanded more strength and precision. She didn't hesitate once. Not a single note wavered. Even the air seemed to still around her. The man finally stepped back a little. His expression had changed entirely now. The confidence he always carried had a crack in it. He folded his arms again, as if trying to rebuild that confidence. But it wasn't working. His eyes stayed glued to her hands. The music grew more emotional, fuller, richer. Her movements were effortless. But the room could feel the years behind them, the practice, the patience, the moments when music had been her escape and her comfort. A soft gasp came from the corner when she played. A series of fast notes that blended smoothly. Without a single slip, someone else whispered, "How did she do that?" The man swallowed hard. He knew exactly how difficult that part was. He knew how much training it took, and he knew instantly that she wasn't someone he should have mocked. She reached the middle of the piece, where the music softened again. Her hands slowed down, letting the notes stretch gently. It felt like the music was breathing with her. People who had been tense now relaxed slightly. A warm feeling settled over the room. The man didn't relax. He stayed frozen. He looked around and finally realized everyone's attention had shifted completely away from him. Not a single person cared about his presence anymore. The focus was on her, the woman he had tried to belittle. His throat tightened as he understood the weight of his mistake. Still, she played on. Her melody grew deeper, filled with emotion that reached into the quiet corners of the room. Anyone listening could feel something through her music, a story of resilience, patience, and grace. It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. And that honesty made it powerful. The man's arms slowly dropped to his sides. He no longer tried to look confident. His expression no longer carried that practiced arrogance. Instead, he stood there quietly, unsure of where to put his pride. He glanced at the door as if thinking of leaving, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The music held him there. She played with such natural flow that it was impossible to look away. Every key she touched carried emotion. Every note felt like it meant something. Even though no one knew her story, they could feel pieces of it in the way she shaped the melody. A small smile formed on the face of a young boy sitting near the front. He watched her with wide eyes, inspired. The man noticed that too. He realized that her music was doing something his words never could. It was bringing people together, softening the room, grounding everyone in the same quiet experience. She reached the final part of the piece, where the notes rose higher and carried a feeling of hope. Her hands moved with confidence, her expression still calm, her breathing steady. The room seemed to breathe with her. She finished with a lingering note that floated gently through the silence. No one moved. For a few moments the room stayed perfectly still, as if unsure whether it was allowed to break the moment. Then someone exhaled. Someone else blinked. And finally, a quiet clap sounded from the back. Then another and another. Soon the whole room joined, not loud or wild, but warm and sincere. She looked up, surprised, as if she had forgotten other people were there. The man didn't clap. He couldn't. His pride wouldn't let his hands move, but his face showed something different. Now, something he rarely allowed anyone to see. Uncertainty, and beneath that, a flicker of respect he didn't want to admit he felt. She stood up from the piano slowly, giving a small, shy smile to the room. She picked up her music folder, gently closing it. The man took a step toward her, but stopped, unsure of what to say. She glanced at him briefly, not with triumph, not with anger, just a calm acknowledgement that he was there. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came yet. For the first time in a very long time, he had nothing to say, and she, without needing to prove anything further, simply walked toward the corner of the room to gather her things, leaving behind a silence that felt full of meaning for everyone present, especially him. The room slowly returned to normal sounds, but the feeling of the woman's performance hung in the air like a warm echo. People murmured softly to one another, exchanging small smiles and shaking their heads in quiet disbelief at what they had just heard. Some still stood in the same spot, replaying the melody in their minds as though trying to hold on to its last trace. The man who had mocked her earlier remained frozen near the piano, his face unsettled, his thoughts louder than the conversations around him. The arrogance he carried so proudly when she walked in had disappeared like dust brushed off a table. What replaced it wasn't anger, though his pride certainly hurt, but something deeper and more uncomfortable. Realization he had misjudged her completely. He watched as she gathered her things at the side of the room, sliding her music folder into a simple brown bag and making sure she hadn't forgotten any pages. There was nothing hurried or nervous about her movements. She appeared calm, almost unaware of the ripple she had caused. One of the older staff members approached her with a smile that was beautiful. The staff member said softly, "We haven't heard something like that here in a long time." The woman gave a small, almost shy smile. "Thank you. I'm glad it sounded okay." "Okay?" The staff member laughed gently. Half the room was about to stop breathing. "You could have charged money for that." She shook her head, amused but still modest. "I just needed to practice. I have a small event coming up, that's all." The staff member nodded as if they understood something more about her than she had shared. They stepped aside, leaving her to finish packing. The man finally forced himself to move. His steps felt heavier than they should have, as though something invisible pulled at his feet. He rehearsed several lines in his head, some proud, some defensive, some apologetic, but none of them felt right. Every sentence sounded wrong the moment he thought it. He approached her slowly. She sensed him nearby and turned slightly, but her expression stayed neutral. Not warm, not cold, just calm. He began, then stopped. The words knotted in his throat. "That piece. Where did you learn to play like that?" She blinked, surprised by the question. Not because it was rude, but because it was honest, more honest than any words he had spoken earlier. "I've been playing since I was young," she said. "It helped me through a lot of things. I guess I stayed with it." He nodded stiffly. He didn't know what else to say, but the silence between them wasn't tense. It was awkward, but not sharp. He looked down at the floor for a moment, then back at her. "You're really good," he said quietly, the words slipping out reluctantly, but truthfully. "Thank you," she replied. Her tone wasn't proud or dismissive. It was simple appreciation. She wasn't trying to make him feel worse or better. She was simply acknowledging what he said. He looked as if he wanted to say more, but before he could find the words, a small group of people approached her. "That was amazing," one person said. "Do you take students?" Another chimed in. "What piece was that?" "It was beautiful." A younger girl tugged her sleeve slightly. "Can you play more?" "Just a little." The woman laughed softly, taken aback by the sudden crowd around her. She answered their questions gently and patiently. She told them the name of the piece, encouraged the young girl to continue her lessons, and assured the others. She was not a teacher, but appreciated their kind words. The man took a small step back as the crowd grew around her. For the first time in a long time, he felt invisible, but strangely, it didn't anger him. It humbled him. He saw how naturally people connected to her. She didn't need to announce her skill, didn't need to perform for attention. People simply gravitated toward her because her presence made the room feel lighter. He watched her smile at someone's compliment, a real smile that came from somewhere gentle. He felt something twist in his chest. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the uncomfortable sting of recognizing her sincerity and comparing it to his own behavior. After a few minutes, the crowd began to disperse. People waved goodbye and returned to their own activities. The room regained its rhythm as the sound of instruments practicing in the distance blended softly into the background. The woman slung her bag over her shoulder with quiet readiness. She gave one last look at the piano, as if silently thanking it, then turned toward the exit. The man found himself walking toward her again before he even realized it. "Wait," he said, his voice less confident than ever. She paused. "I should have let you play earlier," he said. "I shouldn't have talked to you like that. I was wrong," exhaled slowly, almost as if letting go of something heavy. "I didn't expect someone like you to." He stopped. That wasn't the right way to say it. She raised an eyebrow gently. Not offended, just waiting. He tried again. "I mean, I shouldn't have judged you. I'm sorry." His voice carried a weight he rarely allowed anyone to hear. It wasn't dramatic, and it wasn't polished, but it was honest. She studied him for a moment, not to make him uncomfortable, but to understand whether his apology was sincere. "It's all right," she said finally. "Sometimes people make quick assumptions." He swallowed. "I do that. Too often." She nodded. "Maybe, but you're aware of it now." He glanced down. "You make it sound simple." It can be," she replied softly. "Changing how you see people starts with being willing to look again." Those words lingered in his mind. Being willing to look again. He wasn't sure the last time he had done that. She gave him a small nod, not to dismiss him, but to close the moment gently. She started to walk toward the door. He watched her go. But something inside him urged him to speak one last time. "Are you coming back?" he blurted. She paused again. "To practice?" He nodded. "Yes," she said. "I'll need to come a few times before the event." He shifted awkwardly. Maybe I could listen again, if that's all right." She looked at him with calm eyes, not surprised, but not overly impressed either. "If you'd like to," he nodded again, unsure how to respond. She gave another gentle smile, then left the room. The door closed softly behind her. The man stood there for a while, letting everything settle. His pride felt bruised, but not broken in a destructive way. It was the kind of bruise that came before growth, the kind that forced someone to look at themselves differently. He glanced at the piano. The same instrument he had guarded so arrogantly just an hour before. Now it looked different to him. He approached it slowly, placing a hand on the smooth wood. He wasn't sure why he did it. Maybe he wanted to feel what she felt when she played. Maybe he wanted to understand why she seemed so connected to it. Or maybe he simply wanted to remember the feeling her music had given the room. He opened his violin case and took out his instrument. He didn't play right away. He just held it in his hands, thinking. People who knew him, people who feared his sharp comments and superior tone passed by and did a double take. They noticed the change in his expression. The tension in his shoulders had eased. His usual self-important smirk was gone. Instead, he looked thoughtful, almost softened. A few people whispered quietly among themselves. They weren't used to seeing him like that. He lifted his violin slowly and began tuning it with more care than usual. His movements were quieter, gentler, as though he didn't want to disturb the feeling the woman had left behind when he finally played the first note. It wasn't loud or boastful. It was cautious, steady, and honest, almost as if he was learning how to play for the first time. Someone nearby looked at him with surprise. "You sound different," they said. He paused, staring at the strings. "Maybe I am," he murmured. He didn't fully understand what had changed inside him, but he knew something had. Her music had reached him in a way he didn't expect, peeling away layers he had built for years. It wasn't just about skill. It was about intention, truth, and humility. As he continued playing softly, he found himself listening to his own sound with new ears. He heard every flaw, every rushed movement he usually ignored. He didn't get frustrated like before. Instead, he focused. Really focused. The woman's calmness had shown him something he couldn't learn from technique alone. She had played from a place he had never reached. And for the first time in a long time, he wanted to try. The room continued to move through its usual rhythm, but something unseen had shifted. A small change had begun inside him, subtle, but real. And it started with a woman he had underestimated. The moment she walked through the door, the tension from the competition hall stayed with her long after she left the building. She walked slowly toward the quiet street outside, letting the cool evening air touch her face. It helped her calm her racing thoughts. She tried to shake off the sting of the musician's harsh words, but they kept replaying in her mind like a broken song she could not stop. She sat on a bench near the small garden beside the music school. Soft lights hung from the trees, glowing like warm fireflies. Families and students passed by, laughing and chatting, unaware of what she had just gone through inside. She pulled her scarf tighter and let out a long breath, wondering why some people felt the need to look down on others. She had grown up around strict teachers and tough competition, but mockery still felt like a knife. She reminded herself that she had played with honesty, with feeling, and with everything she had. That alone should have been enough. But she could not deny that the musician's arrogant comments had hurt her pride and shaken her confidence. She wondered if she should have ignored him or confronted him more directly. But deep inside, she knew the best response would always come through music, not words. As she sat quietly, she heard footsteps approaching. She didn't look up at first, thinking it was just someone passing by. But the steps slowed, then stopped near her. When she lifted her eyes, she saw one of the senior judges from the competition. He gave her a gentle smile before sitting down on the other end of the bench. He didn't speak right away. He simply looked at the small garden and let the silence settle comfortably. For a moment, she wondered if she had done something wrong. But then he turned slightly toward her. "You played beautifully today," he said in a calm, steady voice. Her eyes widened a little in surprise. She had not expected praise from anyone, much less a judge. She thanked him quietly, unsure of what else to say. He nodded softly, his hands resting on his lap. "You have something rare," he continued. "Your technique may not be perfect yet, but your music feels real. You play like someone who has lived." She felt a soft warmth rise in her chest. Compliments like that meant more to her than any trophy. After a moment of silence, the judge added, "Do not take the harsh words you heard today to heart. Some people hide their insecurity behind arrogance. They fear what they cannot understand." She looked down at her hands. They were the same hands that had been trembling earlier inside the hall. But now, hearing these words, she felt a steady strength returning. He stood up slowly and gave her a small nod. "Rest tonight. Play again tomorrow. When you do, make sure you play for yourself, not for anyone else." Then he walked away, leaving her with a new sense of clarity. She stayed on the bench for a while longer. thinking about everything that had happened. After some time, she finally rose and made her way home. The path was quiet and peaceful, lined with old street lamps and the faint sound of a distant violin from a nearby practice room. When she reached home, she paused at the door before opening it. Music sheets were scattered across the table inside. Her old, upright piano stood in the corner, waiting for her. The familiar smell of wooden keys and warm tea filled the room as she stepped in. She sat at the piano without turning on the lights. The moonlight from the window was enough. Her fingers touched the keys softly, as if greeting an old friend. She closed her eyes and began to play not the competition piece, not the exercise scales, but a simple tune she had learned as a child. It flowed gently at first, but soon grew into something deeper. She played for hours, forgetting time, forgetting the sting of the musician's words. The music washed everything away. It reminded her why she loved playing in the first place. It wasn't about competition or proving anything. It was about expression, about telling stories without speaking. Late into the night, she finally stopped. She opened her eyes and let out a small breath she didn't even realize she had been holding. She felt lighter, stronger. The next morning, she woke early. She made tea, tied her hair back, and practiced again, not out of fear but out of determination. Every note felt clearer than the one before. She took breaks, stretched her hands, and kept her mind steady. As the day of the final round approached, she walked into the music school again. This time her steps were calm. She didn't search for familiar faces. She didn't look for the arrogant musician. She simply focused on herself. Inside the hall, people were already warming up. The musician who had mocked her earlier was sitting with a small group, laughing loudly as if he owned the room. His confidence filled the space like a loud instrument in an empty hallway. He noticed her for the first time that morning. His smile faded just a little as he watched her walk in. She could sense his confusion, maybe even discomfort, but she didn't give him any reaction. She placed her folder on a chair and began stretching her hands. Preparing quietly, the musician gave a short, dismissive scoff to the people near him, as if trying to show he wasn't bothered. But something in his expression had changed. She could tell he had expected her to walk in with fear or uncertainty. Instead, she carried herself with quiet confidence. The judges entered soon after, and everyone took their seats. Whispering faded into silence. The final round was about to start. Her heart beat slowly and steadily. But she no longer felt the tightness she had felt before. She closed her eyes and repeated the judge's words in her mind, "Play for yourself," when her name was called. She stood up and walked toward the stage. The lights were warm, the audience quiet, and the piano gleamed under the soft glow. She took a deep breath, sat down on the bench, and placed her fingers on the keys. All the doubts she had felt before disappeared. She was ready. The hall fell completely silent, and she began to play. She started the piece, the calm strength that surprised even her. The first notes rose into the air like soft steps on fresh ground. The hall was quiet, not a single whisper, not a single shifting sound from the audience. Even those who had been distracted before now leaned in. Drawn by the simplicity of her opening, she played with care at first, letting each note breathe. Her hands moved gently, but with purpose, as if she was guiding the music rather than forcing it. The piano responded to her with a warm tone, stronger and clearer than the day before. She felt the keys under her fingers like old friends who understood her better than words ever could, as she continued. The melody began to grow more complex. Her fingers moved faster, shaping the music with precise movements. Every rise and fall carried a story only she knew. Memories of childhood lessons, late nights practicing, moments of self-doubt, and moments of quiet joy of it blended into the sound. She wasn't playing to win. She wasn't playing to impress. She was playing to speak. Across the hall, the arrogant musician watched her with a different face than before. His smirk was gone. His arms were no longer crossed with confidence. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on her hands, following every motion. The sound coming from the piano did something to him, something he didn't expect. It silenced him. Even the people around him noticed the change. They glanced at him, curious, but he didn't notice any of them. His attention was locked on the stage, and for the first time, he looked like someone who wasn't sure of himself. She reached the middle section of the piece, the most difficult part. Fast runs cascaded like waves, crossing from left hand to right hand, rising and falling in a beautiful, controlled storm. Her heart beat with the rhythm, but she didn't feel fear. She felt alive. Every mistake she had made in practice was gone. Every doubt that had clouded her thoughts had faded. It was just her and the piano moving together as if they shared one breath. When she climbed into the final section of the piece, the hall still remained silent. The audience didn't even shift in their seats. Some leaned forward, others clasped their hands without realizing it. She could feel the energy in the room, the way people were listening, not with their ears, but with their entire attention. The ending came with a soft return to the calm melody she began with. She let the last note linger, letting it fade slowly into the air. She didn't move at first. She let the silence settle again. It's peaceful and warm. When she finally lifted her hands from the keys, the hall remained still for a heartbeat. Then the applause began. It wasn't polite. It wasn't casual. It was loud, sudden, and full of emotion. People stood, clapping with real excitement. Some cheered softly, amazed by what they had just heard. She blinked in surprise, feeling a wave of warmth rush through her chest. On the other side of the hall, the arrogant musician remained seated for a moment. His face looked unreadable, but his eyes showed something she hadn't seen earlier: respect. He stood slowly, though not as quickly as the others, and clapped with a quiet, thoughtful expression. It was not forced. It was not prideful. It was genuine. She gave a small bow from her seat, her heart thumping with a mix of relief and disbelief. As she left the stage, she felt as though she was walking on lighter feet. Backstage, the judges spoke quietly among themselves. Some glanced her way with approving nods. One of them, the same senior judge who had spoken to her the night before, smiled warmly when she walked past. She felt her eyes soften, grateful for his encouragement. All the performers were asked to wait in the green room, while the judges made their final decision. The room was filled with quiet chatter, nervous pacing, and the soft rustle of music sheets. She sat in a corner, taking slow breaths. Trying to calm her excitement, the arrogant musician stood a few feet away, staring at the floor. He seemed deep in thought, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. She didn't avoid him, nor did she approach him. She simply waited. After what felt like a long time, the competition staff called all the participants back to the main hall. The audience was already seated, waiting for the announcement. She walked onto the stage with steady steps. Her hands were no longer trembling. Her heart still beat quickly, but it was a healthy rhythm. It's not one of fear. The head judge stepped forward and raised the microphone. "Thank you all for your patience," he said. "We have reached a decision." The level of talent today was remarkable. Every performer brought something unique to this stage. She stood quietly, her gaze lowered, and now the judge continued. "We are proud to announce that the first prize goes to..." There was a brief silence. Her breath caught. For a moment, she didn't move. It felt unreal, like the sound had reached her too slowly. The audience erupted into applause again. She stepped forward, hands shaking only slightly now, and accepted the award from the judge. He leaned in and whispered, "You earned this. Never doubt yourself again." She felt warmth spread through her chest, the kind of warmth that stayed with someone for years. When she stepped off the stage, the arrogant musician approached her. He didn't carry himself the same way as before. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't boastful. He looked humbled. He cleared his throat and said in a low voice, "You played incredibly well." She nodded politely, thanking him with a gentle smile. He hesitated, then added, "I shouldn't have spoken to you the way I did yesterday." She looked at him carefully. She could tell he meant it. His voice wasn't filled with pride or sarcasm. It was honest. "It's all right," she replied softly. "Everyone learns in their own way." He let out a slow breath and gave a small nod before stepping back. She didn't feel anger toward him anymore. She felt something else: understanding. People who belittled others often did so out of fear, not strength. His reaction to her playing showed that clearly. After the ceremony ended, she walked outside into the fresh evening air. The sky was changing colors, blending warm gold with soft pink. The day felt long, but her heart felt full. Friends and classmates gathered around her, congratulating her with bright smiles. Even people she didn't know told her they loved her performance. She thanked each of them kindly, grateful for every word. Later, when the crowd thinned and she stood alone for a moment, she took a deep breath and looked up at the sky. She had doubted herself so many times before. She had questioned whether she belonged among musicians who acted like they owned the stage. But today showed her that real talent didn't need arrogance. Real music didn't need bragging. It only needed honesty and heart. She headed home with a quiet smile, her award tucked safely in her bag. When she reached her room, she placed it on her piano, not as a symbol of victory, but as a reminder that she had faced disrespect, doubt, and pressure. And she overcame it through music. She sat down, touched the keys gently again, and began to play a soft tune. This time, not for the judges, not for the audience. It's not for anyone who doubted her. She played for herself, and the notes were more beautiful than ever.